Okay, thank you everyone. I just want to acknowledge the thought-provoking keynote we just had. Really, really good. Look, Grosvenor Engineering, we're a hard technical services company. We do HVAC, fire, electrical, plumbing. And a little bit about what we just talked about. We use data at the core of our decision making and emerging technology. So what we're seeking to do outside of the statutory requirements is utilise that data to look at your assets, look at the life cycle and help make capital allocation decisions around risk. And then also make those decisions around the life cycle of the asset and where you can best allocate the capital. So I'll keep it short and sweet, but if you want to know more about that, obviously in the environment that we're in at the moment with budget constraints, please come see us out at the stand afterwards. Thanks.
Thanks, Mitch, and thank you for your support of the VMA. So on to our session around how to re-engage with our casual staff. This session is going to be facilitated by Anthony Duffy, who would be known to most in the room. Anthony's the owner and managing director of VIPeople and is the immediate past president and dean of the VMA Leadership Institute and a current VMA board member as well. With over 30 years experience in major venues such as ANZ Stadium, Sydney Cricket Ground and Allianz Stadium, Anthony created VIPeople in 2003 in order to provide venue and event managers a quality alternative to their customer service front of house staffing solution. Anthony, I'll hand over to you, and if you'd like to introduce our illustrious panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to Mitch for looking after this session. Firstly, let me just say it's great to be here. It's so nice to be in a room face to face and not behind a video screen, and also at the same time pass on our thoughts to those of our colleagues that are in Melbourne. I think this experience of the last 24 hours has really hit home to us as there's two primary venues involved, and it means a lot more to us when we see that happening. So let's hope they get through this, and we're back to whatever normal looks like very soon. When Michael and I first discussed this session a few months ago, the intention was to pull together some industry experts, have a look at the last 18 months, hear their stories about how they engage with their staff, the stories around it, what the learnings were, and how do we keep our staff into the future. Those questions remain important, and we certainly will discuss them in various contexts today. However, since then, I think the industry has been overcome by an emerging crisis, as I've called it, and that is the dire lack of staffing resources across our industry. Many of us discussed and preempted these concerns throughout that COVID period, and when venues re-emerged and recommenced, we knew that was going to be problems, but I doubt any of us thought the issue would be as widespread and deeply embedded as it's become. So if I can ask the audience to start with, I'm curious, having spoken to quite a few out in the hallway, how many people work in a venue that has had trouble filling rosters or trouble filling vacant positions in the last few months? Okay, so probably from up here, that looks to be around about half or thereabouts, and probably a few of you who didn't stick your hand up. And I've got a few minor stats and data around that, which I'll get to in a moment. We've got a great panel with us, and local panel, and very contemporary, and there's some current issues facing this group. So I have Tony Partridge from Brisbane Racing Club, Kim Guesdon here at the BCEC for ASM Global, and Greg Nelson from Asset Pro, and each of those speakers will go through their experiences in just a moment. Before I get to them, and I'm also happy to take questions, I should say, from the floor as well. I'll ask a couple of times throughout the session if anyone's got any questions, so I'll come to you. I thought it'd be worthwhile sharing some details and data from our business for you, and just give you a snapshot of what we experienced. For those of you that aren't aware, as Mark suggested, VIPeople is a resourcing company, and we specialise in workforce solutions in the area of customer service at venues and events around the country. And throughout the COVID period, we certainly maintained our team. We had 150 or more at any one time on JobKeeper, which was an interesting cash flow experience. We got through that, and we were blessed that the 30 or 40 senior staff we have with us, our event coordinators and our supervisors, all remained with us. In fact, we didn't lose any of them. And when we came out of that, we were in a very strong position. However, as work recommenced, and it's built up really since sort of July of last year, it became obvious that there was an increasing difficulty to attract new talent and for, just generally speaking, fulfil our rostering requirements across our many clients. And I guess concurrently, we found that our clients were battling to fill their own rosters. Those of us who used us to supplement were battling to fill their own rosters, and as such had a heavier reliance on us at the same time, which makes the problem even more difficult. And a whole heap of non-clients emerged too with new problems. Whilst I think it's fair to say that the sense of partnership, goodwill and cooperation between venues and their agencies has never been stronger in our industry, I think it's very clear now that the pool of staff, the overall pool of staff, has declined, and our respective ability to supplement it is severely compromised as we speak. And my personal opinion is that this will become worse before it gets better. So I just thought I'd share with you a couple of examples from our recent recruitment exploits. So we're a Sydney-based company with offices in various locations, but in Sydney, just recently, we posted an ad for casual staff. It's the same ad we normally use, updated, of course. Same approach, although we paid for extra boosts through our social media and expanded our social media platforms, focusing on that as our primary source of staff. Pre-COVID, so in February of 2020, the same ad had 760 applications. That identical ad, under those conditions that I just outlined, 2 weeks ago, had 108 applications. So we're down 86% just in volume of people who've applied for jobs. That resulted in 113 people being employed pre-COVID and 13 in our recent recruitment, down 88%. And in regional areas, it's even worse. So in Newcastle, same thing, down 83% from just applications. And the message I want to send, I'm just talking to people out there, some venues haven't gone through the recruitment phase yet. Some venues haven't got to that. And have come out of COVID like we did, all bright and bubbly and very excited. And someone mentioned the other day that staff turned up and they were fantastically excited just to be back, and that's true. And we find that the staff that we have are all in that vein still. The problem will come when you go to supplement it, particularly if you adopt the old model of once or twice a year recruitment. So I'm interested in the panel, particularly probably Kim, talking about full-time staff and how that relates to full-time staff as well. And of course, experiences from the floor as we go. So with that, I'll throw to the panel, and I'll start with Tony. Tony, you've been around the industry for a little while. You've had quite a few senior positions in multiple venues, and I guess you're in a strong position to compare and contrast our current situation to what's gone before. And on top of that, you're in your busiest period of the year. You're in the middle of the Brisbane Racing Carnival, which is fantastic. But the demand is at its peak, and I'm therefore very interested in the problems you've faced, both over the COVID period and currently. And what are your plans to maybe move forward with your team post-Carnival?
Thanks, Anthony. Well, we are in the busiest part of the year, but it's hard to think that 12 months ago we were racing without spectators. So how times have changed. Last weekend we had a great crowd at Doomben. We've got Eagle Farm for the next 3 Saturdays of Stradbroke season, and last weekend we did record wagering turnover for Doomben. So our sport's actually going quite well. But the staff issue, I actually told our board, was our number one risk going into Carnival. And when you deal with horses and grass, that's actually saying something, right? That staff is your biggest issue. So 12 months ago, when COVID hit, the number one thing for us from an HR perspective was communication. So staying in touch with people who had just lost their steady income stream and being empathetic to that, whilst standing down full-time staff and casual staff got nothing. And keeping them part of the club whilst they couldn't come to the club was really important. And coming out of COVID, we have improved our communication. The Facebook page is more active, and we're probably paying more attention to our staff than we did when there was a greater supply of them. And I think that's made us a better business as a result. We have to look at the mix of casual staff now, because we had this perfect storm of our casual staff pool being working travellers and semi-retired people in the main part. Now, both of those groups hit by COVID semi-retired people reluctant to go out of the house, and just, I think there's like, instead of 200,000 working travellers, it's more like 50,000 at the moment to choose from. So half of our 300 casuals were working travellers, and mostly South American, and South America is not doing too well with COVID. So they always taught me that like people hire like people, and it's great for culture, but come a pandemic, it's actually a risk. And that was highlighted this year. Look, I think we've had to think commercially. Some of the solutions that we've got is providing incentives. So if you complete all 5 shifts of Stradbroke season, you get a $100 gift voucher. And that's important because our biggest day is actually our last day of Stradbroke season. So you don't want them getting exhausted or finding a better offer 4 shifts into 5 shifts. So that was one thing we did. Other things is you have to guarantee longer hours. You can't just expect to lay off people after 3 or 4 hours. They can pick and choose, so they can ask for longer shifts. And you need to lock in your event calendar so they have greater certainty. You can't just, change things week by week and be really late approaching staff. So I think the way we manage people has improved.
Last piece there is very fresh for me because we just got thrown an AFL roster for Sunday. I think Richmond are playing Adelaide in Sydney now, so we've just got thrown at the last minute a roster that we've got to fill for 50 or 100 people, and it's not easy.
We need 12 chefs on the weekends too, so I thought I'd throw that out there. So it's chefs and bartenders are the hardest to find, we find.
Sonny, just to give everyone an idea, what's the mix of in-house staff versus agency staff in a time like this for you?
At Stradbroke Day, it'll be 300 BRC casuals and 200 agency,
yep,
which is higher than normal. And instead of just using the one agency, we use 3 or 4.
Yep.
So yeah, it's much higher.
And hopefully this is not too probing a question, but I'm personally aware that you've had some issues around the agencies, plural, being able to provide you with the numbers you need normally. I'm interested in how you've handled that. I mean, these agencies are contracted to you. How do you handle that? Do you beat them over the head? Do you warn them? Do you work with them? How has that relationship evolved?
I think you just ring the next company really, and they're also telling us that less people are signing up to agencies because one of the great things about an agency was the variety of work, and there's just not the same variety of work at the moment as there has been. So that music festivals and concerts and those things are not out there. So we're quite sympathetic to the fact that they don't have the people on their books that they did before, so we're not going to bash them up.
That's actually a good point. We call them the sexy events when you work for a company like ours. Footy's okay and all the other things are okay, but the sexy events are the live performance. Yeah. And then for certain kinds of casual, the multi-day events like conventions and trade shows. I mean, those two sectors of the industry obviously are battling and re-emerging, but the sexy events have been taken away from that group. So from an agency perspective, it's a very shrewd observation for sure. I'll keep moving around the panel and explore further. So Kim Guesdon is known to most of you, the HR director here at the BCEC, and been around the industry for a little while, and probably one of the most experienced HR people in our industry. You bet you'd thought you'd seen it all, Kim, right, before all this. But you whilst here, you're representing I guess a sector that's re-emerging. Still, it's fair to say it hasn't got back to its full capacity or anywhere near that yet. But you also bring a broader ASM perspective across multiple venue types, so that's an interesting observation. So firstly, can you outline for us what you went through the COVID period, how you engaged with your team along the way, and if you're experiencing what I've just outlined as our experience?
We have, or had at the time, 205 full-time staff and just over 500 casual team members. When COVID hit and the business closed down at the beginning of April, we stood everybody down. We probably took about 4 weeks off, I think, and then our business continuity team, so our senior team, returned to work by Zoom, of course. And then we set about trying to figure out what to do, and at that stage it was still very, very early in the piece. Our GM worked with government and just trying to lobby through the landmine, and everybody was still trying to find their way. Short version though, within a few months we were writing a COVID safe plan, working with government. We had a resources strategy. We had a phased return to work. JobKeeper had kicked in, and I think everybody in the room will agree with me, it was a saving grace. We had just over 500 team members here on JobKeeper, 200 not. But it really, I think, gave us a little bit of space to room to move and think. We approached a return to work on a phased return to work. I think 3 phases, about 2 months apart each, to 2.5 days a week of our full-time team members. Business continuity team still remained working 4 days a week, and I'll say that with a smile on my face because we got paid for 4 days a week, but we worked quite a bit longer, like probably most people in the room. We still kept 35% of our team members 100% stood down. Like Tony, we made a very deliberate decision to communicate deliberately, systematically, and in many different ways. And I do consider that as one of our key success strategies. And we started that right up front. And even if we had the bad news, it was about, we committed to ourselves, it was going to be direct and honest. And this is what it is. And we've had a lot of very positive feedback around that. And I think that's been a part of our, we haven't suffered some of the shortages that most in our industry have yet. Say yet, the journey's just starting. But so far so good. We had our first event, AFL Grand Final, last year in August. August? Yes, something like that. And of course we've got agency staff, but we also had as many of our casual team members back as we could. And I truly put that communication strategy down to that continued engagement. So we haven't had to re-engage. We've had a very significant restructure around all of the work that we do, our systems and our processes, around our jobs and our hierarchy, workplace, processes, systems, everything. And we've only about 6 weeks finished that and finalised that in terms of reducing our people numbers. 71 full-time team members and about 250 casual team members. And our primary goal was, of course, to respond to the economic impact, leave a little bit of room for growth, and also, though, provide, and similar to yourself, Tony, we wanted to provide enough meaningful work for a smaller group of people, rather than you can have a couple of hours and giving everybody a few hours. And that's so far working well. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. We had truck the same weekend that the Magic Round was in, and the city was in a bit of crisis with Labor. But we actually managed, and in debriefing with our senior team, we didn't feel like we could see a negative impact for not filling all of our shifts, because we didn't.
So from a pure HR perspective, what do you think your learnings have been? What are you taking away from this experience to date? Communication is key, even when it's very bad news, and it was very bad news. Turn up and own it. Try and do it face to face if you can. And at that stage in Brisbane, well, we've been pretty lucky. We were able to meet with our team members, and it wasn't a HR exercise, our restructure. It was a management team exercise. And so all of our managers were coached in those conversations, supported in those conversations, but they owned them, and we got really excellent feedback from that. So a communication piece from start to start, and we're still trying to continue with that. That's easy when you've got a big team as well, I need to say that. The other one is unpack everything you're doing, because what applied pre-COVID is probably not going to apply post-COVID, and we're still in the process of doing that, and as we do different events or we get busier,
And only this morning in exec we discovered something else that we thought we had covered off. And it's not until you start operating that this journey can well and truly start.
Can I just ask, in respect of the other ASM venues, all from Stadia to live performance, and is there any different experience in those venues?
Definitely, yep. So Suncorp Stadium almost didn't stop. Certainly they didn't have to stand anybody down because sport was quite a priority for government, and the big sporting codes were very quick to move, as were the stadiums who were able to operate. And so they were the very first venue to have an event very successfully. We've got some regional convention centres, a lot smaller than this one in ICC Sydney, and they're doing some really cool stuff. So Cairns was closed for a long period with Renos, so they kind of avoided a lot of the crisis that we experienced. They had their own issues, but they're going through those now. Darwin is setting up or trying to set up a shared arrangement with other employers in the city. They've always had skills shortages up there. So now the employers in hospitality are pulling together, and if there's nothing happening in one venue but we've got a convention, then we might borrow their staff. So that's not finalised, but that's the kind of creativity we need to start looking at, especially in remote areas or regional areas, yeah.
Might come back to that point in just a moment. I'm going to talk about why is this happening and what's the root cause of this problem. So I might come back to particularly a place like Cairns is of interest. Thank you, Kim. I'll just move on to Greg now. And Greg brings a different perspective. I mean, similar to me in that you provide staffing services to a number of major venues. That's great. However, you'll obviously focus on the security sector. So personally, very curious to understand what's happening in that space. Someone told me the other day, and I don't know how true it is, that the security sector, like others, is battling because there's just not the number of guards coming through that may have otherwise. So can you two outline your last 18 months and your observations?
The last 18 months was pretty interesting. I mean, it was 1 week where we sat there and everything dried up. All the touring dried up, all the live entertainment dried up, footy stopped. The only one that kept going were our static guard sites, and one of them being Carlton United down at Yatala, and they were very quick off the mark to start implementing different strategies and whatnot so that they could keep their staff body moving and all the rest of it. So we got involved in that. We had to be a bit agile with that. But then there was a period of time there where there wasn't much going on, as we know that we're all fairly much locked down. The staff were on JobKeeper, which helped us, but it did present its own cash flow issues at times. And qualification for that obviously was at a certain limit, and after we had a wonderful October with the AFL Grand Final, and we were very fortunate, of course, that the AFL camped itself in Queensland. We ended up going from doing an average of 20 games of AFL a season to we did 83, including a few scratch matches for different clubs that were here. So we had to be fairly nimble with that. But once we got to October, big celebration of the grand final was sort of a culmination in a great year for us. We got through it. It was tough at times because the pool of staff shallowed remarkably, and we don't get an opportunity to just go out to the masses and employ people. They've got to be licensed, they've got to be trained, and so on and so forth. So there's particular issues that we had with that, and they still exist. And I think we'll probably go on to that a bit later on. But overall, we're pretty happy. We came out of it that last 18 months in a pretty good position. It gave us an opportunity, I must say, to completely review our policies, our procedures, our quality control, all that boring stuff that you don't want to get involved in because you're doing all, as we said, the sexy events that you like to do, but it's stuff that needed to be done. And I think we've come out of it, even though there was adversity, we've come out of a better company. We're more professional, I know that. We know what we're about now. We actually know what Asset Pro's about and how we interact with our clients now. So I think we're a better company now.
Is it true to say that, again, I've heard this on the grapevine, but RTOs, a lot of RTOs either shut down or stopped running the courses, which cut off the supply of guards?
In fact, I was talking to a colleague of mine for 30 years. I've known Richard for a long time, and he's always been in that training game. And they've closed offices, they've not run courses. One of our other colleagues has got a large training organisation, and they stopped running security courses because they weren't getting applications.
Okay.
So they're actually finding it difficult to ramp their business up because of different figures. People find it easier to go out and get a cab licence than they do to get a security licence, you know.
Is that something that is a long-term problem, or do you think it'll come back quickly?
Oh, I think it'll come back. As you said, and I think it's probably key, as we spoke very quickly about the sexy events. A lot of people that work for us enjoyed the footy, and they love working the football and all the rest of it, but they love working the entertainment centre, the festivals, these sorts of things, which are slowly but surely coming back, but that's not been around. So they've gone, well, I don't have any interest anymore, so they've decided not to work. Or they have an issue with, there's a percentage of them out there that don't want to, as one guy said to me on the phone the other day, I don't want to be working with the great unwashed Greg. And he's the outstanding one in my mind, but there's a few people out there that don't want to mix with crowds at the moment because they're not actually certain that they won't get the virus. So.
All right, I might just for the next few minutes talk about, just take the why piece and explore it a little bit as to why we're experiencing this, and if you haven't, why you will experience it in the near future. And then I'll take some questions, and then we'll talk about some proposed solutions and what the industry maybe looks like for the next little bit. So I've personally identified 5 reasons, I think, and I'm happy for the panel to expand on these at any point. So first and foremost, I think the international borders, and that's pretty obvious. I think I read some data the other day. There's over 100,000 hospitality, international travellers who are usually in hospitality at any one time who aren't here. And I think in the last round of government data they released, there was 46,000 unfilled jobs in hospitality. So I'm of the opinion, I don't provide hospitality staff as a rule. My agency stops at customer service and specialises in that space. And I'd be really interested in talking to, say, the Pinnacles and those other big hospitality agencies to see what they're experiencing. But my opinion is that because of that shortfall, the hospitality industry is sucking a lot of other people out of the industry, certainly people that I might otherwise employ. So it's a massive flow-on effect. So a kid leaving school that might come and get 1 or 2 shifts with me a week and then have 1 or 2 in a cafe can now all of a sudden ask what they want. They can get 3 or 4 days in a cafe, and there's a lot of job security and regular work they can get elsewhere in the hospitality sector that they may not have otherwise done. I saw some data. By the way, I use the labour market information portal. If anyone, particularly non-HR professionals, if you look at that, there's some really interesting stuff on there, and it does give a great insight into our industry as well. And I've seen on that, government data suggests that 54% of all companies have reported difficulty in the recruitment of staff. That was at the last month. They said that, and that increases to 64% in regional areas. Which obviously exacerbates the problem. And take an area like Cairns, for example, there'd be a heavy reliance on that international sector, I'm sure. And the problems in the food services area are expected to increase by a further 20% over the next 4 years. So the government is forecasting, and the companies that are working in that space, a significant increase from where we are in problems associated with recruitment. And the Arts and Recreation Centre is expected to increase by 10%. So obviously, unless those borders open to alleviate the pressure, it's going to continue to be a worsening issue in that respect. The second one is that unemployment across the country is relatively low, and it's certainly a candidates market, as they call it, in the recruitment space. Casual workers just have more opportunities; they have more options available to them. I think they can pick and choose hours, as was mentioned earlier. They can pick and choose where they otherwise may not have had that opportunity. And I also think they're looking at our industry potentially as a bit of a high risk, and there's no better example than Melbourne at the moment. So all of the thousands and thousands of casual staff that had shifts at Marvel Stadium or the MCG over the next 2 or 3 weeks no longer have a job in that respect. They might get it back at some stage, hopefully. But I think that our industry, there's just a lot of risk associated with it. So they're looking at alternatives. And also looking at jobs where they may not have to work such unsociable hours potentially, or on weekends. Because it is a candidates market, they also have the option to uplift salaries. We had a chat out there before about casuals actually now saying, well, I'll come and work in your cafe, I need $30 an hour, not 28 that I can get there, and people are doing it, and they're able to they've got some leverage in terms of their salaries. And also, which is an increasing issue that our industry needs to come to terms with, is the conversion of casual staff into part-time and full-time roles. That's now become a legitimate option. And in fact, legally, I'll be interested to get your perspective on that, Kim, shortly. We're bound by those laws, and it's going to be a bigger issue going forward as well. The third one is, I think, a hangover of the job keeper and also the job seeker payments. I know my 19-year-old daughter is still spending her $20,000 she got from JobKeeper, and I think some people have more or less got out of the habit of working, and it's taking a long time for them to re-enter the workplace. And also, there's a growing problem with a higher ratio of non-attendees at interviews. We've got all the data, I won't bother boring you with it, but there's a much higher ratio of people who apply, are offered an interview, and then don't turn up. And we believe a lot of that is around the job plan that's required for job seeker, where you need to not apply for a certain number of jobs. And it's always been there to some extent, but it's an increasing problem now. People are applying for multiple jobs and just picking and choosing the one they turn up to the interview. The fourth one, and a major one I think in regional areas particularly, is that university campuses are empty, either with international students or local students who are no longer on site. I know in Newcastle, where we have a huge issue, we would have had at least 50% of our workforce coming straight out of that university, usually regional New South Wales kids who are at uni, living on campus or somewhere with a bunch of friends. They're just not there. So the pool has shrunk. And I think whilst it's not a major contributor, I think the fifth issue is also that rosters for COVID are actually larger. And in some cases, we've experienced up to 25% larger with a COVID overlay than they possibly were before. Any of the panellists like to expand on that or give other thoughts as to why this is happening?
I'm glad you threw in number 5, because that's what I was going to say. Everyone's changing their operation and hiring more staff because you need more gate staff, you need to socially distance, you have changed your operation. So, we're now doing QR codes for ordering, and whilst we're a better operation, we need more staff. And if everyone's doing that, I could imagine the multiplier effect.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The COVID overlay creates more activity to occur every time you've got an event, even pre and post, if you've got to tidy up in a hurry.
Yeah, that's true. I remember when the NRL came back, the first few rosters we had were sort of 6 or 7 people. There was no crowds at that stage, and then they gradually started putting 100 people in a room, and then it gradually got bigger. But even when there was no crowds, we had 7 staff on a roster with no crowds, no car access, nothing, but we still had 7, and I think 6 of them were doing thermal checks for the staff and the players and other things. So, and there's still venues, and I know we've just come through the Sydney Rollers show, which is a wonderful success, and over 800,000 people, and they had a team of COVID marshals who just, their job was to walk around and make people socially distanced, which wasn't the easiest job anyone's ever had. But yeah, the positions that just didn't exist before are now prevalent.
I probably have one more, and that is the speed of the recovery. We did not expect the corporate hospitality market to come back as quickly as it did.
Yep.
So during COVID, I thought companies are going to be really reluctant to put 100, 200 people in a room at the races, but as it turns out, they can't wait to get together, probably because they're not seeing each other at the office. And, if it's outdoors, that's a bonus, but we have been taken by surprise.
And we're certainly very excited about that rapid return. We anticipated, not just as a venue, but also as an industry, and then budgeted for return to pre-COVID levels in 23-24, so going up in 20% increments, 40% this year, 60% next year, 80% the following. And already for this coming year, we're almost at 80%. So we're really excited about that. It's happening very, very quickly. Of course, it all has to eventuate. We've still got the COVID overlay, so all of the activities, but that then brings me to mention our restructure in our work. So the COVID marshals, we also have them, and we had them as standalone roles to start with, but with our restructure, under our enterprise agreement, we are able to employ people in a classification level. So if there's 10 jobs in that classification level, we can ask you into COVID marshal for 2 hours, get everybody in, do the retail F&B operation, and potentially then do some ushering. Still early days, and we're still working through that, but successful so far for team members looking for work, and so far so good for us.
Funny, all the experts in the world, all that time to plan, and we still, even with our industry knowledge, still couldn't predict some of the things. And the corporate hospitality is an amazing result. I know the Turf Club in Sydney, I had a chat to them yesterday, and they were saying the same thing about their carnival. It was just unbelievable. No one could have predicted how strong that sector is, which drives obviously a lot of the things we're talking about. I want to delve into the solutions and what the next little bit looks like, if we can, to finish the session off. But before I do, at this point in time, has anyone got any questions of the panel?
Wayne? Wayne Middleton, Reliance Risk. I'm interested, Kim, you talked about the consolidation of a number of roles, and obviously with the major labour shortage that we've all discussed. What about the role of the security guard, given there's a clear liquor licensing requirement, there's a security guard licensing requirement, and yet there's such a large part of the labour force. Do you see that those roles at some point could be amalgamated, and what are the challenges to make that amalgamation happen?
Good question. I don't have the answer. One thing that we did do in our security team, so we reduced our security team as part of our restructure, but what we did was farm out to other roles some of the non-licensed duties that they were performing traditionally. And but what we also did was license our BSD team, our electricians so they're on a 24/7, sorry, they're on a 2 shift a day, 7 days a week. So 7 till 11 p.m, I think. So we actually paid for them to go get a licence so that they could support the security team. We are currently relying on, first of all, in-house multi-hiring. So a lot of our team members already had security licence as a secondary job for them. And our full-time team are also able to work casually as well, and I think that probably happens a bit. We still rely on agency, but I'm not sure how we would farm out some of those, or share or consolidate some of those licensed activities. That it's probably more likely that we'll license more team members to do that work.
You just muttered there, we get asked to do everything, or worse that effect.
What comes to mind is that there's a certain tour with a certain promoter that's now not happening until next year again. But I went through the South Australia situation, walked through the COVID safe plan down there and whatnot, and it required, under the COVID safe plan, to have 40 COVID marshals, which the promoter immediately said, well, security can do both. And while that's probably true in some cases, it's a bit much to expect the guard to perform his role and be a COVID marshal. In having said that, the role that we perform at stadiums now is largely that marshal type thing. We're looking at social distancing, we're looking at getting people back to seats and so on and so forth before things developed with the COVID plan. I'll use the Gabba for an example. When we started with AFL, it was quite strict, and there were very strict zones, lots of zones, etc., etc. Well, that's grown since the beginning of the AFL season to dropping things down, and they've worked through the pandemic quite well, the AFL. When we worked with cricket, it was almost like starting again because they had a fresh COVID plan. So, and from a security guard's perspective, your role has morphed more into something that is aware of all these things that we have to be aware of today. And I think that's something to consideration. We've had to be quite empathetic with the staff because they're not just a security guard now. They're technically, as we say, a marshal, and they've got to abide by the rules of the COVID plan. So, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes you look at when you look at staff members and you know what they're capable of and what they're not capable of. Some aren't capable of multi-roles. I think that's just a fact. And I think we need to be all empathetic with that. They've come back from, as we said before, there's a bit of a lack of work ethic, I think we've struck. And then when they get into their role, they're quite narrow in their scope. So,
I guess it's always been a battle in venues from my experience, ascertaining what is a security function, what's a customer service function. I have my views. But I guess it's more than ever, and that in this period, because of what you just say, I mean, I've heard it in meetings, people say, oh, we'll just get the security to do that. It seems to be the go-to and the default position.
And there's no doubt we've had to be a bit agile with that. And I think realistically, if we're going to keep our job, we need to be agile in this day and age. It's not pretty out there.
Can I just hold the questions for a moment? I'll come back in just a second. I just want to make sure we get enough time to explore the next little bit before we finish up the session today. So I've put together a few ideas for the industry, and I'm certainly going to throw to the panel in just a second to get their thoughts. I wanted to sort of pose this to you. That the relationship between a venue and an agency needs to be redefined. And I believe that this whole experience has highlighted a weakness in that relationship. You know, the days of last minute requests, ringing agencies on a Friday and saying, can you get me 30 staff tomorrow? That's over, that's gone, certainly to that degree. And that expectation that they'll just meet the shortfall at last minute. One that always frustrates me is that often the venue and the agency are in the market together for the same group of people. There's often little strategy around separating your recruitment. So I know I've certainly run clients and said, hey, I see you've got an ad in, we've got an ad in too. It's the same ad, just with your logo and our logo. Why are we doing this? And everyone just shrugs their shoulders and moves on. It happens again next time. So that's a key factor at the moment, competing with each other. And there's also, and I don't know whether it's cutthroat at the moment, but certainly there's never been a shyness around stealing each other's staff. I mean, I know we have a policy, and it's black and white in our industry, that if someone comes to us for a job and works with one of our clients, we do not even interview them, out of respect more than anything. But if they're not available when I need them, then what's the point anyway? So I think that repositioning of that relationship and the strategy around use of an agency, particularly for the next couple of years whilst we re-emerge out of this, is paramount in creating a solution. So if you use agencies and you haven't gone through this yet, but you think it might be an issue, then you need to be sitting with them now, strategising those things together. Can I go around the group? I've got a few others too, but any other thoughts on solutions and where it's headed?
I think you need to look at your mix of staff and start fishing in different ponds for staff. So we've done deals with local colleges to get students who are under 18, and that's working really well. Just on the agency staff, I absolutely agree that there needs to be a more strategic partnership, because venue managers have been told you need to minimise the use of agency staff, but then when you're in a pickle, they're actually the most important partnership, right? So why is it that the agency staff member gets knocked off first? Probably because they're getting, $5 an hour more, and that's logical, but it's not very strategic. And I certainly think now that the supply is so low, we need to work on those partnerships. It's a good point.
And Tony, I hope you don't mind, but I don't mind sharing a specific example. So we at the moment are trying to assist you as much as we can. And I've suggested this to your team, that the number one reason it's not so much now, but at the start of this was that just length of shift, regularity, and the uncertainty around it. So there was we had a different situation where we tried to help at the end sort of thing, but that creating certainty, length of shift, and a pattern of work is paramount for both parties. Kim, you got anything to add to that in your venues? No. Okay. And what about the security?
Our strategy is pretty straightforward. We're interviewing all the time. So weekly, our HR people are interviewing and inducting for 2 days a week for whatever we can get, and we try to sort out the wheat from the chaff, as it were. Some people will get the licence because the government pays for it, and then they turn up at a job interview and they're not really interested in working anyway. And if they do turn up at the induction, their interest levels even lower. So we're trying to sort that out, but the only way that we can get around it and keep the number of staff up is by constantly interviewing and tapping the colleges. And that's why it's been so crucial with the colleges downturn in applications, the pool got more shallow for us.
Yeah, I have that as my third solution. Recruit more often, smaller numbers. I mean, we're forced to. Most big venues had that pattern of recruiting, before the footy season, and then if you did cricket or one of the other sports, you'd recruit in, the start of each season, maybe twice a year, a big group of 50 or 100 intake and top you up. You might have to rethink that strategy just in sheer numbers. So more often, smaller numbers might be the way forward to get us through this period. I think Tony touched on it, the innovation piece, how you actually find these people, new ways to recruit and tap into markets you may not have otherwise tapped into, and try and be creative. Cross-training of staff, we've talked about a little bit, where maybe not just relying on the security guys to do whatever job's left sort of thing, but I think Kim talked about, training other members of your team. We've actually seen quite a bit of that ourselves, where, if we're 5 people short in a roster, that they say, oh, don't worry, we'll get our full-time team in this weekend to do it. So there's a lot of goodwill in that space. I don't know how long that lasts for, but it's been great, and I think it's been good for the organisation to get some of their staff into that event environment as well. And as I touched on before, considering the conversion to full-time and part-time, if hours warranted, of course. And Kim, I don't know if, I didn't really give you the heads up on this, but I don't know if you've got any thoughts on the casual conversion piece that Fair Work have now issued and made, I guess, mandatory. I'm going to use that word. Can you explain a little bit about that?
I haven't got to it, to be honest with you. I've had a couple of informal conversations with Mappian. Many of you in the room will be familiar with them. And we did have some concerns around a pool of our casual team members working on quite a regular basis pre-COVID. And certainly our resources strategy moving forward was to reduce the casual numbers so we could provide a meaningful amount of work for the remaining people. And then out came the casual conversion piece. So we have had conversation around what is really regular and systematic, and there's no one explanation around that. So if it's a football season and you're rostered for every game, that can be regular and systematic. So it's really, I think it's going to be a work in progress. I do think that a lot of people want to be casual so that they can maintain some flexibility in their lives. And we've certainly had a provision in our EBA before this came up that said we had to go down that road. And every time we offered, the person said thanks, but no thanks. They're not prepared to drop the 25% loading either. But the key one was the flexibility.